There are plenty of stories of good bishops standing up against the followers of Satan whenever they set their demonic eyes on the church, and it happens with great frequency. One of the great stories about this happened right here where I live in the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, where our Archbishop, about 10 years ago, was confronted with a strange problem. A self-described follower of Satan had gotten his hands on consecrated hosts and was going to offer them in a black mass. This not terribly intelligent individual decided it was a good idea to advertise as such with his name and face attached to it. So our Archbishop went to law enforcement and made the case to the courts that the host is only authorized for the consumption of or by actual Catholics. And this person was not a Catholic who was doing this. They were a self-described devotee of Satan. And amazingly enough, the secular courts agreed with the Archbishop and found in his favor. And the follower of Satan was forced to give the hosts back. It's a great story. And it just goes to remind you that most people out there, even if they don't hold to our faith, even if they are maybe of a Christian group that's very hostile to Catholicism, virtually nobody likes the followers of Satan, at least publicly. There are plenty of people in our political system who I suspect made deals with Satan himself and are probably trying to reap the rewards of that right now as we speak. But we have a story today that is unfortunate because this is not in the United States. This is in Italy. And the people who did this are being much less public than in previous stories. We go to New Daily Compass with this headline published yesterday. Italy, hosts stolen. Bishop challenges satanic groups. Black mass trail behind the theft in Lecce of hosts and holy vessels from the hospital chapel. Chaplain to the Compass. Planned theft. They found out where we keep the key to the tabernacle. Harsh condemnation from exorcist bishop who had warned about the rise of satanic groups. Cowardly act, convert. Today in all churches, a massive reparation. And there's a picture of the actual chapel this happened in. It happened in a hospital. And if you have ever spent any real time in hospitals, you know that their chapels tend to be pretty open. And in Italy, it's not surprising that a default chapel or a chapel in a hospital would default to being a Catholic chapel. Fun fact, the self-described Catholic hospital in my town, its chapel is ecumenical in nature. So there isn't a tabernacle or anything. From what I gather, masses are said there. But again, it's the hospital calls itself Catholic, but it calls itself Catholic and is terribly. To give you an idea, my wife, when she was in recovery from I think it would have been my daughter. She asked she was in there on a Sunday, and she asked for a chaplain to come and bring her Holy Communion, and they actually had to look for one who wasn't a Protestant, to give you an idea how bad that hospital is. So it's nice to see, at least in Italy, they default to being Catholic. The article is worth going over in detail, because this is such a ridiculous story that if you are in a situation where your bishops are warning about the rise of groups that openly follow Satan, you would think they would take precautions to protect such things. Like, I don't know, keeping the key to the tabernacle on the person of the hospital chaplain at all times, or locked in his private office. But no, they didn't do that. Let's go to the story. In Italy, as well as in France and other Western European countries, we are witnessing a growing wave of anti-Christian attacks, including mostly vandalism against churches. The desecrations do not only have a vandalistic matrix, they're often carried out in hatred of religion, and in addition to radical redacted, Satanists are also among the main attackers, as in Lecce, where the latest, in order of time, serious desecration took place. The Bishop of Lecce, Michele Saccia, informed the public, he's got a full letter, which we'll probably turn to here in a second, of a serious event that took place inside the chapel of the hospital in the Salento town. Unknown persons stole hosts from the tabernacle and some pixies present in the sacristy. Pixies. The Bishop's reaction was decisive and deserved to be taken as an example, since it is not uncommon that when faced with these thefts, many prelates pretend that nothing happened. Behind the episode, in fact, there seems to be a specific theft with satanic purposes. Let us see why. And we'll actually just go directly to the bishop for this. Well, we would, except it's in Italian and I can't translate it. So let's just continue. I didn't feel great when I woke up this morning. I'd forgotten that that was not that letter was only in Italian, which makes sense in hindsight. Anyway. Yesterday afternoon, he wrote, unknown person subtracted from the sacristy. That's an extension translation issue. They took from the sacristy of the main chapel of the Vito Fazzi Hospital of Lecce some sacred vessels used for the celebration of the Eucharist. Even more importantly, the Blessed Sacrament kept in the tabernacle was desecrated in the St. Joseph Moscati Chapel of the Oncology Pole. The bishop expressed all his regret, pointing out that in addition to the serious desecration, a criminally punishable offense was also committed. The regret is accentuated by the fact that, quote, the Eucharist has been profaned and with it all the baptized. With this vile act, the crucified body of the Lord has been desecrated. Can't use that word on this platform. He then addressed the perpetrators. With the same firmness of a father of the family, I address you, and you have committed such criminal acts. Convert. By your conduct, you have attempted to extinguish the glimmer of hope of our most fragile brothers and sisters, who daily go before the Blessed Sacrament to hand over their fears, anxieties, and labors. I also say to you, take courage. There is mercy for all if you return to the Lord contrite in heart. May the merciful God give you mercy and grant you the gift of hope. Let's pause there. It's been a long time since, other than from Bishop Strickland or Vigano or Burke and bishops in that general orbit of things, you've heard a call to conversion laid out against the open adversaries of the faith. In fact, I can't remember the last time I called them a mainline bishop, somebody who doesn't generally speak of the crisis in the church and correct Francis. I can't remember the last time somebody like that actually issued a statement like this. So I'm very happy that the bishop did this. Again, my basic questions stand. Why, in an environment where you know this is a risk, wasn't the tabernacle keep protected? In fact, why isn't are we not just in a general place where priests and bishops admit that this is a risk and this is protected? Do you know how this usually happens? Do you know how, for a black mass, the followers of Satan typically get their hands on a host? They typically get it because of communion in the hand, and a practice that needs to be utterly abolished in the church. It was a terrible experiment born out of disobedience out of Northern Europe and in the United States, and it should be utterly abolished. In fact, until very recently, the Vatican did not allow the practice at all. And there are plenty of videos of American Catholics being denied communion because they demanded it in the hand in the Vatican. That's changed recently. But that's how they usually get it, is they are handed the host instead of it being placed on their tongue. The easy way to take care of the problem would be to abolish that practice. Let's continue. But the bishop did not limit himself only to this reaction, but also gave evidence of wanting to make amends, showing the faithful that an outrage has been committed and this must be repaired. Today, or yesterday, at 10:30 a.m., I will go to the place of the incident to preside at the Holy Eucharist. I will arrange that in every church of the diocese open for worship, a Mass of Reparation will be celebrated on the same day. This would have happened yesterday. The bishop's initiative is certainly positive and clearly shows the faithful that when desecrations are committed, the first thing to do is to repair the outrage received, because even before the faithful, desecration of the sacred species is an outrage done to God. But how was it possible to steal the consecrated hosts? And what lies behind this theft? The Compass tried to find out more and discovered that the episode is most likely to be traced back to satanic purposes present in the diocese. We tracked down Father Angelo Rizzo, one of the two chaplains present at the hospital, who told us a few more details about the dynamics of the event. There were two thefts, he explained, but unfortunately the cameras did not catch them. The unknown persons first went through the chapel of the old hospital where they took all the sacred vessels, but not finding the key, they did not have access to the tabernacle. So they went to the not distant oncology pole, and once they managed to find the key to the tabernacle, where, once they opened it, they stole the hosts and also the host magna for consecration. This is not an insignificant detail. First of all, they did not unseal anything or break the door of the tabernacle, but they managed to find the key that was kept in a safe place. It is likely that this was a well-planned theft. They must have previously observed the movements of communion ministers to figure out where they kept the key. The hospital is open 24 hours a day, and the tabernacle door is often open for various needs related to the administration of the Eucharist to the sick, even outside Mass times. Let's pause here again. They didn't steal a Eucharist. They stole all of the Eucharists in the tabernacle. All of them. How many was in there? They don't say. But if you've ever been an altar server in the New Rite, or even just paid attention to how full the dish is, they put the Eucharist in the tabernacle. You typically in a normal parish and even in a hospital, there are going to be a lot of them there. This is not a small amount we're talking about. This makes the priest say that surely the thief studied how to strike and how to steal the key. A target of theft then, but why? With what purpose? It would come to rule out the trail of some hooligan or someone who wanted to damage the tabernacle, or even just a vandal with a taste for desecration, or even fences willing to sell the sacred vessels on the black market. No, the clues were most likely led to a satanic trail. It seems that they wanted to steal everything necessary for a black mass, he explains. The hosts, including the host magna, pyxes, and chalices. The ordination chalice of the second chaplain was also stolen. Oof. Of little economic value, but of very high spiritual value. After all that of the satanic trail is an element that could also be justified by a recent warning issued precisely by the bishop to his priests. Our bishop, continued Father Angelo, is also an exorcist, not only by virtue of his episcopal ordination, but also as an instituted exorcist. And he recently warned us about the proliferation of numerous satanic groups in the territory of the diocese. The exorcisms he practices have also increased in number recently. But a disturbing fact is also presented to Father Angelo. Lately, on the facade of my parish church, we have found signs that can be traced back to satanic groups such as five-pointed star and numbering in words peculiar to the followers of Satan. It will be the investigations entrusted to the judiciary, that means the secular authorities, to try to shed light. A regular complaint had been filed by the ASL of Lecce that owns the premises, but the clues seem to lead in all likelihood to the satanic track. And the bishop, in his firmness, especially in involving the whole diocese in the act of reparation, has shown that he has no fear of these outrages, with faith and courage. So yes, it's the followers of Satan doing this. And that makes sense. If you ever see a situation where a tabernacle is taken, and then they find the tabernacle, and it's only the contents that are gone, that's exactly who's doing it, because who else would do it? Nobody else would take just the hosts and leave the tabernacle, which is typically at least plated in gold or has gold trim and has some intrinsic monetary value. No, they came for the hosts and other things needed to offer a black mass. If you're not familiar with how black mass is offered, by the way, exorcists and other experts in such things in the church have said black masses are always offered by a fallen Catholic priest, someone who actually is a Catholic priest. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Even a laicized priest is still a priest, strictly speaking. And they always go for somebody like that. Take all the time you need to wrap your head around the implications of that. How do you get to a place like this? The laxity in the church. Communion in the hand is the biggest sign of laxity in the church. That's why Cardinal Robert Sarah has unequivocally called for its abolition. But also sort of a lukewarmness and other things that you see. If you see in a more normal situation where someone steals a host for these purposes, the situation is always because of communion in the hand. And so, but usually people are stopped when your ushers or just alert laity notice that the person was given communion and then they didn't consume it immediately, that they try to take it back to their seat, or they put it in their pocket. Usually people are often stopped that way, but not always. And unfortunately, in a hospital chapel, this is not a normal parish, right? So you're probably not going to have regular laity there other than hospital staff. You can have lots of people coming in and out. So it's not as easy to stop straight to notice that you've got a stranger here acting weird. Let's show you a story. Some of you may have seen this yesterday, floating around social media. This is a sign of how you get this. So the breaking news, as posted by Robert Hackford on Twitter, who is a journalist. The Diocese of Buffalo is announcing that 78 worship sites, that would be parishes, chapels, shrines, and the like, across Western New York will close and 118 will remain open. So that's like 40% of them, 35%, something like that. These final decisions on parishes and worship sites come after a lengthy review process. Now, I've seen people commenting on this on Twitter saying, I think Taylor Marshall may have been one who said this, that it would be nice if we could have the preconciliar bishops back. And that's basically the point not being that the post-conciliar bishops are invalid. It's that the role of the bishop after Vatican II, with the parish council model and a lot of the other changes that were made to the understanding of what a bishop does, is that in practice, while bishops are shepherds, on paper, a lot of times they're just middle management now. They are the manager of the diocese. And as a consequence, they spend a lot of time with their lawyers. Unfortunately, for some obvious reasons, for things that happen in the church. But that's the reality of where we are. A shepherd will be first and foremost in the exercise of their job, focused on the good of their laity. And in the case of what you saw in Italy, focused on protecting the basic assets of the church, its real treasures. The real treasures of the church are the laity and the sacraments, including consecrated hosts. Those are the real treasures of the church, not all the gold stuff that so many people take umbrage with the Catholic Church for. The real treasures are the laity and the sacraments. And unfortunately, there has been far too much focus on material treasures in our time. I do like that Italian bishop, even though they failed to take the measures needed to protect the chapels and their Eucharists, is an exorcist, and he had the proper response. But usually, if you are an instituted exorcist, you're going to have, I think, the right opinions on most things going on in the church. I can't imagine a James Martin type being an instituted exorcist, as an example. And in a related kind of way, when we talk about spiritual treasures, Cardinal Burke has a new book coming out. You may have heard of this. In addition to me pitching my friend and friend of the channel's book on, he has a Christmas book that's essentially a sequel to A Christmas Carol. You can get it on pre-order on Amazon right now. Cardinal Burke has a book coming out. And we can go to the story from Info Vaticana. Again, this is a translated one using an extension, so I have any weird syntax. The headline is Cardinal Burke publishes a book on the denial of Holy Communion as a pastoral act. Yes, denying Holy Communion is a pastoral act. Oftentimes, we tend to think this in political terms, and I'm pretty sure that's the point here. But some people might be denied communion in the confessional. You go to confession for the same sins over and over again. Some priests might take it upon themselves to deny you Holy Communion, especially if they don't think you're actually having the proper contrition. And such activities, even if we don't like even the idea of them, are for the good of the soul of the we'll call them the non-penitent. In this case, though, it's September 2024. It's political season, you might be aware. So that's the context here. According to a press release from Sophia Institute Press issued on the 3rd of September, the work highlights that denying communion is not an act of exclusion, but rather a pastoral measure that seeks to preserve the sanctity of the Eucharist and guide the faithful toward a worthy reception of the sacrament. Cardinal Burke's book provides an accessible analysis of the Church's teachings regarding the Eucharist, addressing the circumstances in which reception of the sacrament should be restricted, the statement said. Published by Sophia Institute Press, the text explores the historical and theological foundations of these teachings, drawing on sources such as Scripture, the writings of the Church Fathers, Pope St. John Paul II, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. According to the statement, quote, in an age of misguided pluralism and doctrinal relativism, Cardinal Burke elaborates on Article 915 of canon law. Quote, those who are excommunicated and those under interdict after the imposition or declaration of the penalty, and others who remain obstinately in manifestly grave sin, are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. The updated edition of the book features commentary by Thomas McKenna, president of Catholic Action for Faith and Family. And we'll pause there. There's a sign that there's a political tone to the book. McKenna provides insights on the Church's historic responses to scandal and heresy, the criteria for denying communion, and the implications for politicians who support grave sins. The book also details the reverence due to the Blessed Sacrament and how the faithful can fully benefit from the graces derived from its reception, as explained in the press release. Readers of Cardinal Burke's new book, it states, quote, will be inspired by how the Church's teaching on the proper reception of Holy Communion is an act of pastoral charity designed for the good of the faithful, for our union with one another, and for the salvation of souls. Check that out if you are so interested. And I'll remind you when looking at that the most important act of denial of the Eucharist to somebody is when you deny yourself access to the Eucharist. Before every Mass, you should do an examination of conscience. And if you arrive at Mass and discover you need to go to confession, hopefully you are in a frame of mind and heart to give a good confession if you have the sacrament available. Traditional Latin Mass parishes typically, but not always, have the sacrament of penance available before the Sunday Mass. Typically, not always. Not as often is the case in the ordinary form. But that is the most important act of self-denial that most people ever have to deal with. But there is a great act of mercy when a public unrepentant sinner politician who calls himself a Catholic is denied communion publicly. It is a chance for them to be called to repentance. And for some reason, so many are afraid to do it. Oh boy, Christine. Okay, bye, Protestant. I'm going to engage. All right, folks. Any final thoughts on this in the comments? Today I'm not in the mood to deal with the types of people who are going to come into my comment section and try to lead people astray and repeat Protestant heresies and errors about the Eucharist. Especially, clearly these sola scriptura types can't actually understand what their Bible tells them and what Jesus said rather unequivocally in Scripture and what is repeated elsewhere in Paul's letters about the need to make good, or the need about the reality of the Eucharist, what happens if you invalidly receive the Blessed Sacrament. So any final thoughts on this in the comments, please? Traditional Catholic said, I would cheer if I saw a priest deny a Catholic Holy Communion. Right. We all cheered when Archbishop Corleone denied Lady Moloch the sacrament a couple of years ago, and he paid the price for it. They punished him. They couldn't quite cancel him because he's too high profile and it would be so obvious what they were doing. But he paid a price for that. Giving people an obdurate sin the Eucharist isn't doing them any favors. To the contrary. How many of you have heard this story? I've heard this horror story so many times. I'm going to ask you this in closing. How many of you have heard this story of either you've had it happen to you or you've had a friend tell you this, that they went to confession, typically for 6th and 9th commandment violations, the private sin, as Pope Pius XII called it. I'm going to keep it family friendly here, but I think you know what I'm talking about, which according to any decent confessor will tell you that 90% of the men and 80% of the women who go to confession confess it. Okay. How many of you have heard or had this happen to you? You don't need to tell me if it happened to you. Please don't. I'm not interested in you making public what's between you and your confessor and God. But they went into the confessional and were told by the priest, oh, that's not that big a deal. It's a matter of a habit. It's not a big deal. So just next time, instead of denying yourself communion, say an act of contrition and then go receive the Eucharist. How many times have you been told that? Or had a friend tell you they were told that? Or you've just heard about it? It's the worst advice you can give somebody. It really, really is. Yeah, it's a habit. A real hard one to kick. But come on. When a priest tells people that, they're leading their souls astray. They're leading them to one place, and it's not down the straight and narrow road. Mike says we have limited time to repent. Exactly. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. Pray and do some sort of act of penance today for the offenses that I outlined in the story about the followers of Satan taking the Eucharist. Please do so. Unite your prayers to the penance that bishop's calling for in his diocese. You don't have to. It's not your diocese, but we are Catholics in a universal church, and it is our duty to actually do so. So make some kind of act of penance today, if you will. As always, pray for the church. Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.